Good morning, I'm Kevin Price. Delighted to be with you. I'm going to spend some time talking to you about you and your business. And I have a lot to talk about. You know, and I do a lot of interviews. I do about 100 every month. And been doing this particular show for 15 years. So, you know, at some point you can become like, an interview's an interview. And I think all of them are good. But sometimes I get excited about one. And today is certainly one of those examples. I just finished reading a book called The Conservatarian Manifesto by Charles Cooke. He's with National Review. And really a very well done, very smart book and extremely timely, and I'm delighted to have Charles Cooke on the program. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your background. Obviously, we noticed you're not from our neck of the woods here in Texas. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I moved to America 4 years ago from England, actually 4 years ago yesterday, and I came over because not only had I always loved America as a place, but I'd become more and more libertarian in my thinking, and I believe this is the one place in the world that still serves as a repository of classically liberal values. It's a lonely place to be in England, good a country as it is, much as I do love my family, when you believe in the right to keep and bear arms, and when you believe in almost unlimited free speech, and when you believe in localism and low taxes and free markets. And so I came over here, and I'm staying. I work at National Review now. I'm married, a house and a dog and a car, the American dream.
Yeah, very good. Tell us a little bit about you, where you are ideologically. You mentioned that you have become increasingly libertarian. Were you considered maybe traditionally conservative for much of your life? Tell us a little bit about that path.
Oh, no, I wasn't at all. I wasn't a socialist, but I was on the soft left in England.
Okay.
I believed in the National Health Service, which is not just a single-payer system, but is run by the government. All the doctors and nurses are employed. I thought that was a good idea. I thought gun bans were a good idea, speech restrictions, high taxes. I'd never really thought about politics too much until 9/11, but I certainly wasn't a conservative. Where I am, I think, is outlined in the book. In the Conservatarian Manifesto, I outline my thoughts as to where the right should go. It is, of course, my definition of conservatarian. I'm sure there are people who disagree with me. But it, as do I, sits somewhere between the conservative side of things and the libertarian side of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I would be a classical liberal if you were to take...
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be probably the closest definition of me. There's just certain things on that I just haven't given up on, even though from libertarian instincts are telling me that they're futile. There's just certain things I haven't quite given up on, and so I would say I probably am a classical liberal. And but I'm what they would call a three-legged stool Reagan conservative originally. Pro-defense, pro-family in the sense of the 1980s, and then pro-limited government free market. And just over time, I loved the line that Rand Paul gave in his speech announcing his candidacy when he said that the reality is that the United States, which has $18 trillion debts, is in no position to be nation building anywhere else around the world when it can't even build its own nation. You know what? That resonates with me. And I think there's a growing sense that, especially among conservatives, at least anecdotally I can say for myself, where we kind of looked at and say, wait a minute, we don't trust government in all of these areas. Why would we trust government in these other areas? And I think that's kind of a growing awareness out there.
I think there is a growing awareness. I wouldn't quite put myself in the Rand Paul camp, although I don't disagree with anything that you've just said. It's not just defense spending, and in the book I criticize the way in which Republicans and conservatives often do not apply to defense spending the same sort of responsibility and criticism that they would anywhere else. But it is, as you say, the competence of government. Now, I am convinced, and I think 200 years after the Battle of Waterloo, perhaps more than ever, that it is imperative that the strongest nation in the world must be the United States, as between 1815 and 1945 it was the British Empire. We do want a country that broadly observes classical liberal principles in charge, if you will. But of course that doesn't mean that we are capable of defeating anybody. It doesn't mean that we're capable of building nations. It doesn't mean we need to get involved militarily in every fight. It does mean that we should be more powerful than anybody else and have the power to project force if necessary, because when there is a vacuum in world leadership, and again, that doesn't mean when there is an absence of war, but when there is a vacuum in world leadership, bad actors move in. And that's not good for free trade, it's not good for commerce, it's not good for the movement of people, it's not good for free speech and human rights either. So there's the line I draw in the book. It's broadly along Rand Paul's lines, although I think he's probably more of an isolationist or a non-interventionist than I am.
Yeah. And by the way, I've known Rand since college. We were both members of Young Conservatives of Texas together, and he's a personal friend of mine. But I, for one, I'm actually supporting a governor. I like the idea of a chief executive being in the White House. I think part of the whole Obama disaster was the fact that we had someone who was from the peanut gallery rather than someone who was in a position to have to make decisions. I'm not a big I think there's a reason why Barack Obama was the first president since the early 1960s to be elected from the U.S. Senate. It's just not a very good proving ground. And so I'm actually I personally am kind of a Walker fan, Scott Walker fan. I think, although not a libertarian by any stretch, he's certainly courageous, which I think certainly is required. And you know, we jumped right into this conversation, and for those who aren't familiar with the concept of the Conservatarian, which is the name of Charles's book, the Conservatarian Manifesto, the idea there is that demographically, both conservatives and libertarians really do need each other, don't they?
Yes, we don't have too many spare votes on the right.
Exactly. You know, and the reality is that traditional conservatism as a demographic group is very, very age, I guess you could say age-weighted, if you will. It's in the later 40s and older, while the libertarian group is in usually younger than 45, although there's obviously plenty above that. All you have to do is look at the Mises Institute to see that. But you know, there's a great opportunity there for the two to consolidate, because although there's certainly areas of disagreement, there's vast areas of agreement, and then there's a common enemy, which is statism.
Well, that's absolutely right. There is a common enemy. The term conservatarian is not mine. It's a word that has started to pop up. I noticed it's being used by people when I would go and speak to them, by people on the internet. Many Twitter biographies and Facebook pages have the word. And I wonder what it meant. And my interpretation is really twofold. The first is that it's the product of a generational divide, in the sense that there are a good number of younger people who are not progressives, they're not statists, but they disagree with conservatives on the questions of gay marriage, of national defense to an extent, of marijuana legalization, and of federalism. They think that conservatives, last time they were in, control too much from the center. But they are generally pro-life. They're generally in favor of a strong defensive, not necessarily one that intervenes. And they are in favor of immigration controls. And this younger contingent disagrees, therefore, with the older contingent, as you suggest, but they haven't moved leftward.
Yeah.
So the first point is that. The second point is that many people now call themselves conservatarians because either, like you, they've changed their mind on a number of issues, or they were so disappointed with the Republican Party between 2001 and 2007 when it had full control that they didn't want to call themselves Republicans or conservatives anymore. And they wanted to distinguish their own ideology, which was, for example, mostly conservative and free market, but would not have done Medicare Part D, would not have done No Child Left Behind, and may not have gone into Iraq, from what was deemed conservative during those years.
Yeah, interesting. When we come back, we're going to go much deeper here in this conversation on conservatarian ideas and specifically the book, The Conservatarian Manifesto. Again, Charles Cooke, he's our guest. He's with National Review and the author of that book. I'm Kevin Price, and this is The Price of Business.